Hello, 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 wonderful people. Welcome to a day when, in this very moment, I am restoring the sacred feminine within my being, and I am channeling that, sharing it for one and all, to restore the sacred feminine in wholeness, to wholeness, for everyone and everything. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you some spiritual literature, some spiritual traditions that I've had the great benefit to immerse myself in over these past few decades of really longing to know, to discover, to live, and to share the truth of what we are. What a great life. I mean, even when it's terrible, it's still a great life. It's still amazing. And this notion of restoring the feminine to wholeness, restoring the sacred feminine, is just what the world needs now. It's just what you need, whether you identify as male or female, or many of the other gender expressions, identity or none, that the active and receptive principle, traditionally known as masculine and feminine, have run amok. And in that running amok, we don't get to create with the true power of our soul. There is a lecture in a body of wisdom called Pathwork, and you can look it up, pathworklectures.org. There's a body of wisdom that just tells us so much wisdom and information about how we operate here on the planet and how to transform it in wholeness. And there's about 278 lectures that were delivered through a woman named Eva Perakis. And I believe the last lecture she delivered was sometime in the 1970s. But lecture 169 is called Masculine and Feminine Energy in the Creative Process. And I have studied that. You can buy a book called Creating Union, which is a compilation of those lectures having to do with love and romance. It applies equally to whatever sexual preference that you identify as, and it applies to whatever gender or none that you identify with. Because really, masculine energy is an active energy and feminine energy is a receptive. And every human being, every creative being has both. The active, which is the moving, and the receptive, which is the receiving and letting be, gestating, if you will. And I have been, this lifetime for Cindy Lou has had a lot of struggle with the feminine principle. I come in with a lot of masculine energy, which means a lot of active energy. But active energy is only going to bring harmony, peace, joy, abundance, if it's in the positive current, if it acts with love, pure love, loving without conditions, real deep caring. And a lot of that active masculine, we could call it principle that I had in the early days, so forced, so came from a place of not accepting my feminine, my letting be. There was a sense of danger and fear around the feminine as being weaker or not enough. And I kind of rallied my internal forces to make sure that I was going to be strong. And in the mix, I plowed over my feminine and I distorted my masculine, or my active that I just, used too much energy for and then neglected the receptive. And now I get to a period in my life where I can see how those two are playing, and I can see how in this very moment for myself, for the members of the Galactic Council of Women, All Genders Welcome, and for everyone and everything, that the feminine principle in wholeness needs to meet the masculine principle in wholeness for us to come back to the originating force, so that we can create with the same energy that made worlds, so we can connect with our soul, with our spirit, with how we know the greater God, Great Spirit, Jesus, Buddha, Baba, Allah, science, nature, Goddess, universe, however we know the something more. I was told by my fiance that it would help if I would do a little dictionary definition, or a little bit of a compilation of what each of those words mean to me. And of course, there's so many more ways to know the infinite than that. So I have that in my bailiwick to be doing. So however it is we know the greater, I've always said this, I wasn't quite sure about the masculine divine, like God as a man and he and how we've used it. It didn't bothered me so much when I was growing up, and then it really bothered me in my 20s, and it really stuck me in my craw in my 30s, and by my 40s, I was feeling okay with it. And now in my 50s, I'm feeling that the truth of the divine is awakening, not just in me, but in everyone and everything. I used to say, whatever the greater God is, doesn't have external genitalia. I'm pretty damn sure, I almost said damn, I'm pretty heavenly sure, but damn sure, that whatever the infinite source that made everything was, is not have a penis or a vagina, does not, fire off sperm or eggs the way our human beings do it. Now, maybe that's blasphemy for some, and maybe I don't know, but I really feel that way. And as I became immersed in learning about all the religions of the world and spiritual traditions, as I was searching for those answers to those universal questions about health, happiness, harmony, prosperity, and more, I came upon a lot of wisdom that really helped me. And I want to share with you something that's coming into my consciousness in a new way, specifically in the last couple of weeks, specifically in the last 3 days. And that has to do with me claiming my role as the feminine divine embodied, meaning that I have within me that universal, beyond universal creative principle of the feminine, and I can inhabit her with power and might and voice. I think partly why my voice has been a little scratchy, and with what I've gone through recently, is that I'm transforming into the true voice, the true beauty, the true purity. I don't know if I said that right. The true purity, the infinite love. Oh my. And the lasting momentum in my life that will come from really owning and proclaiming that force. So I looked up a couple words to serve us today, since I'm feeling all that. And I looked up sacred and feminine. Sacred I've looked up before, and I love this definition, and it comes from Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster. I used to have a big old book that big when I was younger. I believe it was the Merriam-Webster dictionary. We had an encyclopedia this big, and we had a thesaurus that wasn't quite that big. And that's how we found out our information back in the day. And those things were very well used. I don't think I have them anymore. But I love, with reverence and respect. Sacred is something that you revere and you respect. And then I looked up feminine in many different sources to find out the originating etymology, I think I'm saying that word right, of feminine, because mostly the definition is of a woman. But now coming to know so much more about the limitations of the way we have interpreted gender and the gender roles, and how pseudo power dynamics have suppressed or forced all sorts of things that have not helped us. I wanted to find the origin of the word, and I'm going to read it to you because I think it's crazy fascinating. Paper. Sacred glasses. Feminine. Middle English, from the Anglo-French feminine, without an E, from the Latin femininus, and from feminina, woman, akin in Old English to delu, D-E-L-U, which means nipple, which is the first thing that kind of makes sense to me in here, having to do with something more than just how I know woman. Latin, filius, son, felix, fetus, and fecundus, which mean fruitful, and filare, to suck, and Greek, thele, nipple. Well, I kind of like that definition of woman, having to do with, as I see, where I understand a little bit more, that where the differentiation might be in terms of biology. And let me just tell you what, I realize that I am treading on very controversial grounds right now. And I am just espousing my opinion and my awakening. Take what you like and leave the rest, because, everyone's got a piece of the puzzle. I read a book recently called, I just wrote it down. My daughter gave this to me for Christmas because my youngest son identifies as non-binary and transgender and queer, called Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid Menon. It's a purple book. It's a small book. And I read that book and I thought it was fascinating. And I learned so much about the origin in our time space, more modern time space, about the different gender roles and how they really are about power over or power under, being under the power. But the one thing that didn't become clarified for me in reading that book, whether it was in there or not, it just wasn't for me, was how then do we quantify the difference between a sperm and an egg? Like in our society now, we still need a sperm that comes from what we call a male form that has external genitalia, and then from an egg from a female form, which has internal genitalia and also has mammary glands that produce milk, which is why I love this whole business of the Latin fellare, to suck. Oh my God, is that where fellatio comes from? I think it just might be. Well, boys and girls, we just learned something. And non-gender identifying human beings, we just learned something different. So that's kind of clarifying for me. I used to say this years ago, that the only thing that a man couldn't do is be a mother, and the only thing a woman couldn't do is be a father. Well, I don't think that's so much true, but still we have this business of the sperm and the egg. So we will use, every time that I'm going to refer to masculine and feminine, the purity of it is how we create embryos that new life, new souls can inhabit. That would be the only distinction that has meaning when it comes to biological form, in my opinion, right now. And I want to read something to you from a body of wisdom. Oh my goodness, I think it might be good for me to take a deep breath. How about you? Oh, yes. Very enthusiastic. And we can be enthused, which comes from the Greek, entheos, and God, and take deep breaths. As a matter of fact, it actually helps us. I want to read something from now that masculine and feminine principles in the creative process from Pathwork Guide Lecture number 169, originally delivered on January 3rd of 1969. And this explained it to me. I first read this probably 2 decades ago, and it was epiphany after epiphany for me. Fabulous word. Let's have epiphanies today. I pray we all have epiphanies. Major realizations. This is how this enlightened group of energies, collectively called Guide, that Eva Prakis channeled, shared what masculine and feminine meant. Masculine, to activate, means that the conscious entity, which I like the conscious entity, not just the man or the woman, deliberately claims, sets in motion, moves towards, causes, determines, or purposefully, Cindy Lou, purposefully uses these forces by calling them into action and removing all possible obstructions. Effort and endeavor are an integral part of setting the creative forces in motion. This is active doing. We may call this the masculine principle in creation. I just want to say, when I read that just recently for this live stream broadcast recorded in the eternal now, so whenever you're receiving it, it's ever fresh. I thought about my fiance, the man that I'm going to be marrying, and maybe sometime you're watching this and it's already occurred. This is being recorded in the year 2022. I was blown away by how he inhabited the masculine energy, or the active energy and wholeness, in terms of pursuing and holding our relationship. Deliberately claims, sets in motion, moves towards, causes, determines, and purposefully uses these forces, removing all possible obstructions. I have longed to surrender to that kind of energy, because that's what the feminine does, and positively not submits like we might hear, but surrenders. And I so appreciate him in this moment, and myself, for being able to, in parts of our partnership, inhabit this. Because of course, I'm active at time and he's receptive. It's not cut and dry like that. We all have this within us, but how much I appreciated how this relationship and the faith and the core of it was initiated with his active energy. And now I will talk about what, from Pathwork, Guy talks about the feminine principle. The feminine principle is receptivity, of letting the activating forces work their lawful way, universal lawful way, towards fruition. And that rang true in the definition that said fruitful too. The woman's womb is fruitful. The conscious attitude behind letting go and letting be is one of patience, trustful waiting, of allowing a ripening process to come to fruition, of surrendering to a force set in motion. This may be called the feminine principle in creation. And then, guys, this is a very long lecture. I just took some of it out because I wanted to share with you that. I love that patience, trustful waiting, allowing a ripening process to come to fruition. And having had the opportunity in this lifetime to have 4 babies gestate in my being and to birth them, that's exactly what happens. I will say it was not so patient or trustful at times, especially with the first child that was new for me. But allowing this ripening process to come to fruition, wow, I do know that in the body, and it helps me today. I didn't know so much about surrendering to a force set in motion. I think I tried to think the process way more. I mean, I read every book I could on pregnancy. Back in the day, they still have it this in this day, What to Expect When You're Expecting. I had that book. I had a photographic memory one time in my life. Not so photographic now. It's more like Doris Day soft lighting memory, like a little blurred vision kind of memory. But I remember every bit of that. And I can even see it now, certain pages. I remember when the baby was the size of a grape. How wonderful. Or a peach. My baby's a peach. And I also read all the things that could go wrong. And I tell you, that went into my psyche right now. And I just recommended to a friend who's getting that book with her first pregnancy is, for goodness sakes, try not to imprint on the negative stuff if you even have to read it. Don't put that into your consciousness. Have faith in this. Everything's going your way. Because you will figure it out anyway. If something does happen, if there's some sort of obstacle, you'll figure that out. So I'm going to continue reading. I want to let you know also something about pathwork. When I first received this body of wisdom, I would generally pass out asleep when I was reading it. I mean, I felt like I was being given some sort of energetic roofie. So much so that if I had trouble sleeping, I'd pull out Fear No Evil or Creating Union or any of the other lectures that I had downloaded and printed out from the Pathwork series and read a new one, the one I hadn't ever read before. And it was like the owl with the Tootsie Pop. 1, 2, 3, crunch. Cindy, go bye-bye. And those sleeps, I think, are real deep healing sleeps, where that information is integrating in your psyche and in your form and in your energy. So if any of what I read to you, which sounds like English that you probably know all the words to, if you're not getting it from your consciousness, have no worries whatsoever. Your form, if you're here with me now in whatever time space you're receiving it by how we humans measure it, you're receiving it in the eternal now. You've called this to yourself and it is being activated. So you can let the feminine principle, just let it gestate. Just let it be. Surrender to this force in motion. All right, I'm going to read this. The attitude of letting be means to be receptive and to wait. It is also a movement, for anything that is alive must be moving. But this kind of movement is very different from the movement of the activating principle. The activating principle moves out towards another state. The spirit of letting be is a movement within itself. It is a pulsating, involuntary movement, while the movement of activation is deliberate and self-determining. The feminine principle or femininity is often wrongly associated with helplessness, passivity, inferiority, or being parasitic, weakness in itself, in its essence. While the masculine principle or masculinity is often wrongly associated or used with brute force and superiority, and without that unconditional wisdom and love of the whole picture. Doesn't that make sense? I'm just going to say that again. The feminine principle is wrongly associated with helplessness, passivity, inferiority, parasiticness. I don't think that's a word, being parasitic and weakness, while the masculine principle is often wrongly associated with brute force and superiority, or acting without unconditional love and the wisdom of perspective. I see that at force in the world, the brute force of the active principle that doesn't act with unconditional love, loving without conditions. Love is the primal energy that made the heavens and the earth. It is the literal definition of whatever the greater is. No one that is connected to that level of their spirit, which is within them, their soul, which is connected to the greater, to the forces of the heavens and the earth, would ever voluntarily hurt someone in that way that we see happening on the world stage and we've seen happening for a very long time. And people who identify as woman, and I'm sure non-binary or transgender or whatever it might be, it doesn't have to do with the identity. It has to do with acting in ways that is not considering the effect on our individual spirit and our soul. You know, there's a beautiful phrase that I read once that said something like, shame never liberated a spirit and self-righteousness never softened a heart. When someone's actively shaming someone else, because any gender or non-gender can do that to another or to themselves, it's the active principle in distortion. And then, of course, we see it in the most intense acts of war and violence. But there's hope. Here's the hope. You're the hope. I'm the hope. We are the hope. We are the potential to shift that. And I believe it's already been set in motion. The active within me and within you has already set in motion. Loving without conditions. The Galactic Council of Women, All Genders Welcome, has set that in motion in such a powerful way to dissolve the illusion, the delusion of being separate from oneness, so that we can act in loving ways and we can receive that which we long for. We can be receptive and let be this growth of a new humanity. And of course, we're going to be acting and letting be. I mean, it's just all day long. That's all we do, people, is act and let be, act and let be. It's how everything is created. I'm going to read something else to you from, again, the same Pathwork lecture. And this, I think, is so important to understand about the power of the feminine being restored to wholeness now, the sacred feminine, the reverential, the respected feminine within you, within every being. In reality, the feminine cannot be truly feminine unless she, he, it is self-determining. In the terms of this lecture, a woman has to be secure in her selfhood by activating the creative principle within herself. For only when she is accountable for her mistakes, I'll say her actions, and willing to accept and learn from them, can she be strong and self-responsible. Then she will be unafraid of total surrender, of letting go, of allowing the involuntary forces in herself to guide her. I can see, I can feel. Can you hear that the cost is fear? When anyone who identifies as a woman or identifies as any gender, but specifically women that may feel powerless or even non-binary or a gender fluid people feel powerless or helpless or suppressed, it behooves us to be self-determining, to determine what we want for ourselves and the universal self that we see in this world, and to activate that creative principle within ourselves and within our environment, including this globe, and to be accountable for our actions. You know, this whole shame business is hindering or whatever it might be, or being afraid of failure. It's just experience, humility. When we have the dignity of who we are, humility, humble pie is the greatest kind of pie. There is no shame. There is no embarrassment. There's just a great honoring of course, Of course, we're going to play and make mistakes. Remember Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus? It was on PBS. My kids watched it growing up. I loved it. Get messy, make mistakes was her motto. Yes. And when my kids would get hurt playing or whatever, and of course I would kiss their boo-boos and dress in whatever way and hold them and talk them wonderful words of everything was going to be okay. But I would also congratulate them because I used to say this, no one gets hurt. If you didn't get hurt because you were just sitting on the couch, unless you become like 50 or something and you just roll over and you can do something like that. But I'm wanting to heal that too, and I think I am. But of course, when you play, you're going to get scratches, you're going to get hurt because you're out there at times. Maybe not if nothing ever happens to you, but it's like well earned boo-boos, people, well earned mistakes, and well earned the ability to be humble. Whenever I work with men who identify as men and who are dads, when they ask me, when they're working about being a really great dad, I encourage them to model the humility of going for love, of going for things and being able to be aware of the mistakes with compassion and with humor and wholeness. Because nothing causes as much fear as pride. Because if you have, this is the unhealthy pride, not the healthy pride, of course, but when you just have to be the best or make sure no one makes fun of you or whatever it is, there is such a limiting, inhibiting force that causes it to come out sideways. And of course, that is hurting. I'm going to read on here. Then they will be unafraid of total surrender, of letting go, of allowing the involuntary forces in herself to guide her. I've been experiencing that in 2 levels of my life right now. Well, probably multiple, but 2 that I want to share. One is with this venture that I have been having stir in my soul for decades and coming to my consciousness for at least 11 years. And now being using the active principle to set in motion this galactic council of women, all genders welcome, which is like this in a nutshell, what I'm talking about today. Yeah, it takes some, willingness to do that without like a fear of failure, maybe occurring to me what might happen and what will people think of it, but really taking a stand on the unconditional love within me and the blessings that I've been given and the blessings that I've cultivated, the ability to have a connection to the deeper within me and the greater around, to help usher in a new age, to help a suffering humanity awake. Yes, the active principle in me, the self-determining, self-responsible, which really is the ability to respond, has responded to the call of my personality, the call of my spirit, and the call of the souls on this planet and everything and everyone, including the planet herself, to be able to serve what's being prayed for right now. And there are great times where I just let it be. You can't force a worldwide matrix, a global network of deeply caring people who want to awaken the truth of the oneness, of the abundance, of the true power that we have all within us overnight. It's a process and it's a building process, and it's one of learning, of try it this way, of try it that way, of letting it be and letting any issues that come up that cause me agita or consternation or fear, let them be brought to the light of my consciousness. Let it be shined. I never really know how to do the past participle of shine, shone, shine, have shine. Let the light shine on it. Let me work it out in relationship, especially with the creative force of the Galactic Council of Women, who are the most highest light group of people ever. And then move forward. I want to say that I have a lot of healthy dignity, healthy pride in myself right now for the willingness to call something this, call myself the Empress of Infinite Supply, because that's what I believe is true. There is infinite supply and radiant love, because I want to be a divine light personified for other people to partake of. and let go of any limiting notions. Because I'm surrendering, I am unafraid of the total surrender to the power, to the abilities, to the longings of my soul, and I'm going for it. I call you to do the same. I call you to sit in the throne of the sacred within you, the respectful, reverential, powerful within you, the active power, the receptive power, the effort and the grace, the moving and the letting be, the patience and the trust, and the power, the mother bear force. Father bear, parent bear, all bear force. And go for it. And then I want to read just a little bit more before I bring this to completion. This is again from that Pathwork lecture. The feminine principle of receptivity, of letting the activating forces work in their lawful way towards fruition, brings about this. Her aim will be to experience ecstasy by uniting these true creative principles in the manifestation of the man and the woman. Could be the man and the man and the woman and the non-binary gender identification, all of that. I just happen to identify, and I'm in a relationship with someone who happens to identify as man and me as woman. And that's the second thing that I've been experiencing, this longing to totally surrender to. In much of my life and in much of women's lives, we inhabit a lot of the active principle. We inhabit the working, the going out, the moving, the getting up, the whatever it might be with children and offspring when we're in that stage of our lives. I know personally, having 2 entrepreneurial businesses devoted to serving the upliftment of humanity, Cindy Unleashed and the Galactic Council, there's a lot of active in that. But I have been so conscious of wanting to also not move by force and letting it be. And in my relationship with my fiance, I certainly take the active roles in certain things. But I have so longed from the first moment that I read Creating Union years ago to experience myself in the growing ability to surrender to the masculine force in the ecstasy of uniting these 2 principles. And it's really good. It is fantabuloso. I am so grateful for it. And since ecstasy is infinite and it's growing, it is something that's continuing to grow. And I'm so grateful for this moment in time. I'm grateful for all of the partners that I've had in this lifetime. I am so grateful for the extraordinary experiences that I got to have about being myself in a relationship, every bit of them leading me to this moment in time and the continuing moments in how us earthlings measure time. And I am so grateful to be in this relationship with this beautiful man and have the experiences of surrendering and growing and communicating and receiving and playing both roles back and forth at times. It is just, it's good people too, because the pleasure principle and the body that identifies as the female, with the female genitalia having to do with the clitoris or the clitoris, potato, tomato, tomato. I don't quite know how to say that. Sometimes it's said clitoris, like in the Seinfeld episode with Dolores being the woman who's rhymed with the body part. But I'm favoring clitoris right now as well. And perhaps we should put a mature word content on this when it goes into cyberspace YouTube to record. I actually don't think so too. Like, why can't we say that word? That organ in the female form is the only organ in any of the human species identifications that is dedicated just for pleasure. 8,000 nerve endings just for pleasure. Doesn't have any other biological function, which means to me that the principle of receptivity, once it's in wholeness, once the feminine knows how to act in the active masculine, that principle of setting a force in motion and not letting go of it, of a dogged, one focused, thou shalt not stop this unobstructed force of the feminine that says, no, not another child starves or is killed or mutilated or suppressed or told they're not enough or forgotten or forced into some performance that never makes them feel like they have any ability to rest or they're not enough. I'm also talking to the classic educational system and the powers that be that write that, because the way many of the constructs around education that haven't grown yet deplete the parent, the child, the educator, and the system in this having to be something so we're happy later, and destroy the joy of learning and awakening. And we are in the age of the compassionate awakening. And it is said spiritually that the feminine principle or the receptive principle in wholeness, which means that we have our active principle in wholeness too, those that identify as women and everyone else, we have that ability to act, that principle is going to move across this globe and through this globe and from the heavens and through the earth to everyone and everything, and we are going to bring in a new age. It is so, it is written. And it's fun, by the way. That's why I'm committed to that. It's itching my nose right now. Boy, doesn't it feel really good to scratch an itch? I also think that having to really pee and then not being able to go and finally then pee feels like the closest I know to a traditional orgasm that anyone can have. Although I don't want to do that to my bladder and all the accompanying apparatuses. But when that happens, or a sneeze that you let come from the bottom of your toes all the way up. Oh, sweet Lord. If I smoked, I might have a cigarette after that too. So pleasure, receptivity, surrendering, and letting go with trust and patience. As we also know the active and wholeness, acting from unconditional love, removing obstacles, that is how we restore the sacred feminine into wholeness for everyone and everything. It is time. If you haven't already joined me in the Galactic Council of Women, All Genders Welcome, you are enthusiastically welcome. Because it's fun and it's crazy great, and it might not be quite understandable, but it's wonderful to surrender to a force in motion with patience and trust and surrender to love. And I will tell you that on behalf of myself, I am doing everything I can to awaken to the unconditional love in me. And those that support the Galactic Council and that have joined and are joining, we are devoted to bringing in a new way, a happier way, a more harmonious way, a prosperous plus way for you and for everyone. In this very moment, I feel grateful. I feel powerful. I feel happy. I feel a little bit aroused. Mazel tov. And I am delighted to have shared this with you. Love and blessings, dear wonderful person. Mwah.